Okay, so I want to discuss a bit the very contentious issue of immigration in the United States. This is something that, as a European, I connect with on some level because it's something that we have. It's also obviously a very hot topic here. The exact circumstances are not the same, but some of the stories are similar, and some of the public discourse is certainly similar. Before I continue with this video, with the main points that I want to lay out. I'm going to just summarize basically my stance on immigration as a general idea. That is to say, I'm middle ground. Um, I do not believe in an interconnected world and bringing up the drawbridge. I believe that immigration can definitely have positive aspects for an economy. And I also think it is a basic human desire to have happiness. Now, if people see better opportunities in another country, why begrudge them the opportunity to make the most of life? You know, we're all put on this planet. We're born into different circumstances. Some of us are born into harder circumstances than others. And if there's an opportunity for better quality of life, who could begrudge anyone for wanting to take that? It's a basic human desire. But I do take issue with the notion that unlimited immigration is not problematic because I think it is very problematic when you have a situation of having a large number of people coming into a country and this idea that there should be no sort of checks on them or no sort of controls, which some on the left frankly do advocate. I think that is extremely misguided and reckless, and actually, far from being in the humane position, that's arguably more inhumane because it is creating a situation where tensions inevitably rise, where mistrust develops, where you have people in situations where they're going to be put into detention centers. So I'm not talking about the US here. I'm just talking about a general concept. In Europe, we've been dealing with this situation in the Mediterranean. Thousands of people have drowned, and there's no easy answers to it. But clearly, these people are risking life to get to what they perceive to be a better life in Europe. And many of them come to Europe and end up in a bit of a wilderness in the so-called jungle at Calais. But anyway, this video is not about the situation in Europe. I'm just making the point that it is also a very hot topic here too. Um, so within this video, the main focus is on the US-Mexico border. And this is a very, very topical subject right now because of the way it's been raised, especially by Donald Trump. As everyone knows, he made a trip to Mexico the other day on the invite of President Pena Nieto. Pena Nieto has faced a lot of domestic criticism for that, because Trump is obviously a deeply, deeply controversial figure within Mexico and within the US. I'm not going to go over all the things I said about Donald Trump. I don't think he is fit for the White House. It's not up to me. It's up to the American people. But I am one of many critics of Trump. That is not to say I disagree with absolutely everything he says, because I don't. But rather the inconsistent way in which he does it. I mean, what's just happened with Mexico is a prime example. His campaign team says that it was all about looking statesmanlike, but he clearly said one thing in Mexico. He was a lot more moderate there than what he was saying in Phoenix. And that just looks like a height of hypocrisy. Now, all politicians do it, but Trump doesn't look like he's even trying to hide that inconsistency. Um, Having said that, I'm going to find myself on some level somewhat defending Trump, and I would just ask that people hear me out with this. Firstly, I have to be honest, I really don't know all the issues here, so I'm going to try and not pontificate my own opinion too much. I'm going to form some opinions, but I'm not going to, I absolutely admit, hand on heart, I don't know all the issues here. So if I have said something that's inaccurate, feel free to correct me do it in a civil way because I'm admitting here that I don't know everything, and that's the purpose of this video is not to be really in depth, it's simply reflecting on the situation and voicing my views. So there are some things that I don't know about, and I'll try and point that out where it is the case. I'll try and emphasize that point. Um, Nevertheless, there are some things going on that I think need to be discussed and reflected on. Firstly, I am well aware of the history of colonization in the Americas. Um, and it's a very long and troubled history. There's no question about that. I could make a video all night, lasting hours and hours and hours about all the things that happened in, especially early in modern American history. Manifest Destiny, The Trail of Tears, Andrew Jackson. It goes on and on and on. I happen to believe that great injustice was done at that time, and certainly there were crimes against humanity, but it wasn't a simple case that the white man went in and killed all Indians. That is, I have studied the subject a bit, and it's simply nonsense to suggest that there was a deliberate policy of killing as state policy throughout. Certainly, killings took place, but for example, the early Pilgrim Fathers, they relied on the Indians to do the Native Americans to do trade, and so on. They relied on them. Certainly, a lot of Native Americans died from European diseases, but this was at a time when the average European didn't have a clue about medical knowledge. So certainly they brought those diseases, but they wouldn't have known that. This was long, long before advanced medicine. So there's a lot said about that time, a lot of sweeping statements made online that I think don't really look into all the facts of the time. And that's not to condone in any way some of the awful things that were done by white settlers, because there were. Um, and there were, incidentally, some pretty awful things done by Native Americans as well. I think one mistake about this whole debate, and I'm saying this because I think it's relevant to the overall discussion, it does come into the modern debate, is this kind of this very almost childlike picture, this very black and white image of the evil colonialist white man versus the kind of noble native. Um, that narrative is somewhat misleading. It's actually rather patronizing to Native Americans because it's taken away their humanity. It's suggesting that they didn't have internal warfare, which they did. It's suggesting that they were entirely noble people. They weren't. There were internal customs that Native American scholars themselves have questioned. Um, Certainly, it was their land. There's no question about that. They've been there since the last ice age. But this narrative of the evil white man versus the noble native it's just a bit simplistic. And anyone who presents that sort of narrative, usually it's people who are very, very anti-American and they want to try and make some sort of point. Anyway, to get to the modern debate, this is obviously something that has brewed up before. It isn't the first time. Like this current tension is not the first time. 2006, during the Bush era, Bush Jr. era, there was, of course, the nationwide protest about immigration reform. I don't know all the details of that. That's why I don't want to talk too much about it. My understanding is there is 11 million undocumented migrants in the United States. That's an awful lot of people. Put that in context, that is like the population of several European countries. Countries like Hungary, Greece. Um, it's double the population of Norway. So it's a lot of people. As I understand it, there are 34 million Mexican Americans. That includes some famous figures like the boxer Oscar de la Hoya, who I have a lot of respect for. Um, I've been following this debate, and it's obvious that there's some very strong feelings on both sides. I do think that if you're living in Vermont or New York, it's people are going to have a very different perspective than those who live in border states like Arizona, California, Texas. Um, and that's important. I think that is important because I sometimes think that there are people in some of the states further north, which may be more liberal, um, kind of look down on those in Arizona and Texas as being really ultra conservative or something, but they're not looking at the situation that may be going on in those states. Now, like I mentioned at the start of the video, I think that I sort of take a middle ground approach with immigration, and I understand that people want a better life. But what Donald Trump said, and this is coming back to the point I made where I'm going to appear like I'm defending him, and it's not so much that I'm defending Trump, it's more that I think in order to give proper debate to this, it isn't just about Trump, it's about the overall issue. And what Donald Trump said was, I've watched that speech several times. He clearly said, he was clearly making quite a crude generalization of Mexicans when he was saying they don't bring their best people, they bring rapists and drug dealers. Then he put the caveat, but I assume some of them are good as well. Now, of course, that bit isn't going to be mentioned by the more left wing progressive side of things. He did make the caveat, and his supporters and the candidate himself ever since then have tried to emphasize they were only talking about illegal immigration. Now, here's the thing, right? I'm an outsider, but I have to say I do struggle to see why that is so contentious. What is such a big deal with a country wanting to control its borders? I'm well aware of the Texas Revolution, of the Mexican American War, and there are those who will say we didn't cross the border crossed us. So I understand the historical context. But the United States is a nation state, and in my view, every nation state in the world has a right to have some control over its own borders. Otherwise, you would have anarchy. The world is not a perfect place. It is not the John Lennon song Imagine. Imagine there's no borders. That's not the world. The world has borders. And within Europe, of course, there's the Schengen zone, which is the free movement of people. Now, because of Brexit, that makes our situation somewhat complicated. Although we were never in the Schengen zone anyway. But um, firstly, let's think about what Donald Trump said. They don't bring the best people; they bring rapists and drug dealers. I can definitely understand Mexicans being offended by that because it is a generalization. But having said that, there will be some rapists and drug dealers among them. Now, that's true as well. I think the problem is because Trump is not an experienced politician, he comes out with these stupid sound bites and he doesn't think about what he says, and that's one of Trump's biggest flaws. He does not speak in a presidential manner. He could have made an equally strong point without using it in those sort of terms, and Trump never does. That's one of my main issues with Trump. But not everything that Trump is saying is wrong. I mean, those who are saying there should be absolutely no checks, well, the United States today is very different from the time of the Mexican American War insofar as it's a much, much bigger population and it's a growing population 320 million people thereabouts and growing. Um, you know, that's significantly higher than the time of Manifest Destiny, so that difference has to be taken into account. Um, And there are, frankly, Hispanic gangs in cities like Los Angeles that, from my perspective, seem to cause a lot of problems. That's not to say all Hispanic people do, certainly not. So please don't get me wrong. But, the likes of the MS-13 gang, um, and I know they're not Mexican, I know they have origins in El Salvador, but the point I'm making is to say that there is absolutely no problems with immigration, I think is a flawed argument. And it's an argument that isn't looking at all the facts. Um, there is no question about it. There are many, many people who come to America, they work damn hard, and they go through the legal process and they contribute to American society. In many cases, they bleed and die for the United States of America. Those people absolutely deserve citizenship. But I think the contention here is that among Trump supporters, the frustration is that people are portraying it like Trump's against all immigrants. I don't think he is actually. I think he's been irresponsible on some of the things he said. But even the Democrats, if they're being absolutely honest, would want some sort of immigration control. So they're vilifying Trump. And when Hillary Clinton gets into power, I'm sure she will introduce some border controls as well. I mean, this is common sense. This idea that there is an equilibrium between those who go through the legal process and those who don't, I think that's misguided. So when people say things, and I think it was rather, I won't say a low blow, but I think the Democrats were really politicizing this insofar as they were bringing out. I watched the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, and they were really, really relying on sentiment. So they brought out a little girl whose parents were undocumented migrants, and the whole point was to try and shame Trump and the Republicans. But my thinking was, well, wait a second, doesn't her parents have some responsibility here? I mean, if you go to a country and you knowingly break the law of a country by entering that country illegally, it's not a very good start. And don't get me wrong, there should be humanity here. I do sympathize with people who are constantly living in fear, constantly worrying that, as Marco Rubio put it, their grandmother might be deported. It would be an unpleasant way to live, constantly live in fear. But frankly, there's another aspect to be discussed here, and that is Mexico's own attitude to immigration. Because one thing that seems to be overlooked here, and it's something I was thinking about, because on Mexico's southern border, they have their own immigration issue with impoverished Latin American countries, Central American countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua. There's people coming in from those countries, and the Mexicans aren't exactly welcoming them with open arms. So when Mexicans are kind of up in arms about this and portraying the US as really racist, I would say, well, wait a second, Mexico's doing the same thing. So frankly, there is a certain degree of Mexican hypocrisy here. Um, and I also think that if you go to the United States to have a protest about immigration and you're holding the Mexican flag, I do think that's contentious. And frankly, if I was an American citizen, that would piss me off. I'm just speaking candidly. I feel that is a disrespectful thing to do in any country. And I would say the same thing about Americans if they were holding the American flag in Mexico. In fact, I doubt that would be tolerated. So I do think there's a certain degree of hypocrisy here. I also think it's unfair on those who go through the legal path. They've played by the rules, and yet there's people who haven't played by the rules who are saying, "Oh, treat us the same way. We should just get in, and that's it." In terms of granting amnesty, I understand that's a very contentious issue among the Republican side. I'm not. I don't know if that's the right approach or not. It has been discussed in the UK as well on a much smaller scale. That's to say, undocumented immigrants here. I think it was the former Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg actually proposed making them legal British citizens. So we have had similar issues here on a smaller scale. Um, I understand the logic behind it because you take people out of living in the shadows, but my simple message would be I understand that people want a better life, but go through the legal process. Surely, when people are sort of making this case about children and young people, constantly living in fear from their parents being arrested, surely their parents have some responsibility. Why is no one attaching any responsibility here to those who choose to go over the border illegally? Now, like I said, I don't know all the issues. There may be more to it than what I realize, and I do apologize to anyone if I've misunderstood anything here. But this is how it's coming across, and I'm going to close this up soon. But I would just say that people on both sides of the debate need to be moderate. So those who are advocating unlimited immigration and simply denouncing Trump supporters outright as racist, without question, there's jingoistic, nationalistic aspects to hardcore Trump supporters, and some of it is outright racist. There's no question about that. I've seen it at Trump rallies, and I don't think anyone could deny that at times Trump has been behaving like an outright demagogue. Having said that, this idea that simply talking about immigration, simply saying that there should be controls, and forget Trump. I'm talking about anyone who's saying that is it's absurd to suggest that is racist because the same thing happens here. There are some on the left who will insist that everyone who supports UKIP is a hardcore racist. or that everyone who voted for Brexit is a racist and they're doing it because they don't like immigrants. Um, in the case of the US, there's actually many immigrants themselves who want tougher border controls because the way they look at it is they've went through the legal process. And I think, I mean, I don't have that much sympathy for Donald Trump being misunderstood because I think he's brought it on himself with the reckless way in which he talks about things. But all I would say is there needs to be, both sides need to calm down from my perspective and just look at this in an objective and reasonable manner. So to those who are protesting against Trump and so on, I would say I understand your frustrations, especially if you're Mexican. You know, I wouldn't like to be tarnished as a rapist or a drug dealer, and and I understand where that anger comes from. But by the same token, what is unreasonable about saying that people shouldn't break the law of the land? You know, don't go to a country illegally. Simple as that. Um, don't do it. I mean, am I missing something? Is there, to those who advocate that, I mean, would you go to Mexico and break Mexican laws? No, you wouldn't. So I really don't see what the difference is. Um, and like I say, you know, I think this issue of Mexico's double standards needs to be discussed a bit more because at the moment, especially former Mexican presidents like Vicente Fox, they're really pontificating and they're saying things. I think they're saying things to attack Trump to kind of cement their own popularity. That's how it comes across. Final word, the wall. I think that is a crazy idea because Trump insists the Mexicans will pay for it. They say they're not going to pay for it, even if it goes up. And I'm very skeptical that it will go up, but even if it does, firstly, it's not for me to say it's on American because I'm not an American, but it seems to be on American. You know, the concept of putting up a wall, it's the sort of thing communist we associate with communist states, notably the Berlin Wall. Also, geographically, practically, it's going to be difficult because there's rivers, there's mountains. It's a 1,000, is it 700-kilometer border? You know, to put up a straight wall, it's very simplistic, and it's going to be one of those promises that people make. I mean, I was going to say politicians make. Trump is essentially a politician now, no matter how much he says he isn't. Um, it's a bit like Obama saying he would close Guantanamo Bay. Um, you know, this is a promise. I guarantee you, even if Trump gets into the White House, he gets 2 terms, putting up that wall is going to be very difficult. Um, and I can't see how, I don't even think it would stop illegal immigration anyway. I mean, unless it's 100 foot high, I'm sure people will find ways to get over it. Unless you have like manned border patrols the whole way along. And I know there has incidentally been tensions on the border with border guardians and all sort of thing. So all I would appeal to both sides is just try and listen to the other side, listen to what the arguments are, and try to be reasonable. As an outsider, um, I don't know all the issues. There's a lot of hyperbole going on, and all I would say is that there needs to be some sort of moderate, reasonable approach to this. I think it's understandable that people want a better life, and you know, there's the other side of this where when American leaders talk about being the greatest country in the world, they can't exactly blame people for wanting to come. It's like it's almost like an advertisement, like come and see this movie. Oh, but we don't want you in the movie theater. You know, if you're advertising your country as the greatest in the world, then you can hardly blame people for wanting a better life there. On the other hand, I think people do have personal responsibility as well when you go to a country. And the point is, many immigrants who go to America contribute to American society, that they are an essential part of America. You know, America's a country built by immigrants. And very few Americans today, in fact, the only Americans who can say they're not immigrants are Native Americans. So that's the point I would make. Let me know your thoughts. If anyone's offended by anything I've said, I apologize because that really, really isn't my purpose for this video. If I've said anything that people have taken personally, I apologize. But I am just, you know, talking as I see this, and I think it is a very important issue, and it is definitely going to have a major impact on the next president, whoever he or she is. So we'll see what happens. Um, but yeah, my approach, as I hope I've exemplified, is middle ground, centrist. I understand both sides. Um, and there's issues playing out here like nationalism, but also reckless behavior from both sides, as far as I can see. So let me know your thoughts. I'd be particularly interested in hearing from people from border states or from Mexico. And if you're offended by anything I said, well, what can I say? I've tried to be reasonable in this video. I've tried to understand both sides. Let me know your thoughts, and thanks for watching.